so the video is currently recording.
Continue.
Okay.
Are we good to go?
I guess so.
Okay, then I'll start. Welcome everyone to Making Democracy Work in Criminal Justice. I'm Maxine Anderson with Liberty and Justice for All. Please keep those principles in mind as we go through this presentation. A little housekeeping that we need to do, as leads do. Please use the chat box for questions and comments throughout our presentation today. The webinar will be recorded, except for our small group sessions. There is no way that we would be able to address all the issues with our justice system in 1 hour. We will be highlighting some main points. You should have received resources by email, which will also be posted on our webpage. Even if your league has not prioritized criminal justice in program planning, remember that there is intersectionality between the justice system and issues and movements, such as voting or immigration or climate change, homelessness, and affordable housing. Activists may find themselves at some point interacting with the police or the courts for one reason or another. We want to take this moment. Next slide, please. We want to take this moment to recognize the people who have died unnecessarily at the hands of our justice system, a small fraction of whom are represented on this slide. And we want to commit to continuing to work hard to bring about reforms to ensure the safety and well-being of all people, with liberty and justice for all. Here's how our 1 hour will be spent. After my introductory remarks, Ashley Ravichet will present some of the criminal justice issues we have been directly addressing here in California. She will be joined by Karen Douglas from League of Women Voters Central New Mexico and Roxanne Klingensmith from League of Women Voters Montana, who will share a bit about the great work their leagues have been doing with criminal justice reform. We will have the opportunity for small group discussion, after which Jen Wong will describe how the League's Observer Corps program supports public participation in governance. And since we are a league, we will have time for Q&A. Leagues from all over the country are interested in criminal justice reform. This map that you see now represents where today's participants are from. Our presentation is not meant to suggest in any way that one size fits all answers. Each community will come up with ideas for reform that will meet their specific needs. And yes, that is sun across my face, and that is not me. Sorry. Sorry about that. Over 100 leagues participated in our survey on criminal justice reform. If your league has not participated in the survey, the link is in your agenda. The top 4 areas of interest are ensuring racial equity, developing effective reentry programs, developing alternatives to extreme sentencing, and reducing mass incarceration. Leagues are also interested in learning more about addressing the use of excessive force, ensuring effective officer training, and understanding successful prison programs. A great example of collaboration, this group is lobbying for legislation at the state capitol. 2 league members, 2 from different nonprofits, 1 from a professional organization, and 1 is a university professor. Our branding, next slide, our branding generated support for our criminal justice position at the 2019 state convention. You have already received information about these positions in the materials we sent a couple of days ago. Before California had a criminal justice position, our action and advocacy were supported by national positions, for example, individual liberties and meeting basic needs. California has had a juvenile justice position, as do 20 other states. Last year, California became the 32nd state league to establish a position on criminal justice. You have a link to our criminal justice position. We hope that some of the ideas will inspire you to develop a position or to update your position. We also look forward to learning from all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. I hope you can hear me now, everybody. Thank you, Maxine, and welcome League members joining us for Making Democracy Work in Criminal Justice. We obviously do not have enough time to really do deep dives today, so I want you all to just know that we're going to be circulating this recording and that we're going to continue sharing resources and continue this conversation as we embark on racial justice and the inequality that we're seeing today unfold before our very eyes. Something I get asked a lot in the activism space is, how do you keep going? How do you fight the injustices? How do you fill your bucket? And what I would say is that activism gives me agency. It makes me feel like I have a little bit of control to help shape and help change what we're seeing. So let's go ahead and quickly dive into what we have learned, these national trends. You're going to see that top graph. That is the mass incarceration rate of the United States compared to the top NATO countries. You can see off the chart 698 per 100,000 people compared to countries like Iceland, Denmark, Netherlands, who are down at the very bottom. What I'd also like to point out, as I scroll through my script here, is that we have more jails than colleges in this country. 74% of people in jails are not even convicted of a crime. We have African Americans 10 times more likely to be killed by police officers. These are the things that we have learned while we engage in this space. So, next slide, please. We talk about League, and we talk about the power of League questions. This is something, as a League member, I think we all forget too easily, how much power our questions have. So what I suggest as League members start to engage in this new space for League, that you all consider to first observe the local power dynamics and ask the question, who has the power to shape these reforms? Who's responsible for the oversight? How are individuals held accountable? Is this process transparent? There's also questions to ask. Who are the collective bargaining bodies? Who are the key stakeholders? The next, we're okay. Next slide, please, Danielle. Thank you. The next is understanding the power of coalitions and community partnerships. League does not operate in a silo. We operate in a collaborative reform way. I want to show all these images of the logos of the various coalition partners that I've engaged with just in the last few years while trying to push forward some criminal justice reforms in the state of California. Next slide, please. So, although I cannot stress enough the importance of coalition building and League's legacy in coalition building, I really want to get to the nitty-gritty of how to talk about criminal justice. We need to talk about criminal justice, and we need to understand that bias and racism are difficult conversations. And so we need to face those issues with intention and impact. We need to speak about individuals within the criminal justice system with generosity, with dignity. We need to remember the humanity. And I would like to also remind every League member that we do have a policy on diversity, inclusivity, and equity. And I said that wrong because I got a pop-up right here blocking. But these are already policies that nationally we hold dear and near to our hearts. So when we go into humanizing language, close this window for me. I'm going to read you a quote. "The worst part of repeatedly hearing your negative definition of me is that I begin to believe it for myself. For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. It follows then that calling me inmate, convict, prisoner, felon, or offender indicates a lack of understanding of who I am, but more importantly, what I can be." Now, Eddie Ellis was an activist who passed away a few years ago. He spent 23 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. And when he was released, he spent the rest of his life, every last single breath, pushing for these reforms. I think we need to find the importance of speaking on these issues from the perspective of individuals. Now, the power of League. Why is League so remarkable other than just asking questions? League is powerful because we connect government with community. We help bridge that gap. We shape policy reforms at the local, state, and national level, and we can lend a hand to that coalition space where individuals may not understand what it takes to engage with government. League knows how. We've put on grassroots movements before, which is how we even founded the United Nations. Next slide, please. Voting rights. This is what our organization is about. This is us staying in our lane. And what I want you to understand is that the persistent racial inequalities in arrest and in sentencing serve to dilute the voting strength of our communities of color. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you this map. This is a map of felony disenfranchisement in our country. The highlighted colorful aspects of this map show where these reforms are currently in the various state legislatures, where they're trying to either abolish felony disenfranchisement or they're trying to expand voting protections in these various states. Now, I want to just raise the issue that Iowa just a few days ago signed into law that expanded and removed felony disenfranchisement. They now allow automatic voter registration to occur. And Iowa used to be the state that abolished voting rights if you were convicted of a felony for the rest of your life. So they went from being the absolute worst in voting protections to now making it automatic. And I really urge you as League members that if you want to engage in criminal justice, this is the space that you start at. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, this is the new face of suffrage. We have 16 states, which I just was so happy to update on my slide today, that automatically restore voting rights. 76% of 1,000 surveyed respondents believe that voting would help them stay out of jail and feel more connected to their communities. I think that's a powerful statement, and that as League, we understand that movement. Next slide, please. This is an image of our coalition space for ACA 6. This is the Free the Vote campaign that's being launched currently in California. And this, go ahead, next slide, please. Use of force. We have 2 case studies that we're going to review. That's obviously, this is the time that we transition to that less comfortable space. We're comfortable with voting. Now we're going to move right into racial inequalities, and there's going to be a deeper dive here. So AB 392, this was the California law that was just signed in 2019 that elevated the use of deadly force, restricting it to only when necessary. It requires officers to self-identify. It also triggers criminal investigations. This bill, once it was signed into law, has then since turned into the Peace Act, a federal act, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But what I want to stress, go ahead to the next slide, is that that campaign was successful because it was led by victims, families. It was voiced not by lobbyists, not by league members, not by the grassroots who operate in these spaces. It was led 100% by the families who have suffered such a great loss. So we're not here to give solutions to your league on how best to approach, but some things to consider, those questions, those lines of questions that league should feel comfortable asking their government bodies when they discuss use of force is, what is your policy on use of force? Is it elevated to when necessary? What are your policies on alternatives to force? What are your current training modules for de-escalation? Do you require the use of distance, time, critical mindset before an officer engages? Is there a duty to intervene? Is there a duty to report excessive force? Are you currently collecting data on use of force? Are you currently submitting that data to either the Department of Justice or to the FBI databases? These are questions that you should feel comfortable asking your local law enforcement agencies and the individual policymakers that are making these decisions. Go ahead, next slide, please. 21st century policing. It's something that if you are unfamiliar with this report, it's very long. There's 3 very long reports, and I suggest and urge every single one of you to at least read the last report. And what this says, this report was released in 2015. It is still the gold standard when we discuss police community relations. It talks about how there's a breakdown in trust and how to rebuild that legitimacy. It talks about policy and oversight bodies. It talks about how the advancement in technology and social media needs to have a conversation space for law enforcement, such as how are they posting their mugshots on social media? What are they doing with body-worn cameras? Are they advancing to tasers or some other type of technological change? How does community policing play out in their community? What's the crime reduction? How are the trainings and the education for officers? And the part that we often forget in this conversation, because we are coming from a space of advocating and amplifying community, is the officer wellness and safety. Ultimately, this idea of 21st century policing is that it's not putting communities' needs above officers' needs, and it's not putting the officers' needs above the community. It's an equal playing field. Next slide, please. So what seems as common sense is not always the common practice. Unfortunately, I just got a note that Karen Douglas, our presenter for this next 2 slides, is not able to join us. So I will go ahead and try my very best. Karen, she was there in our practice session, and she is from Central New Mexico. Go ahead and put on to the next slide, and I will do my very best. So Karen spoke to us about how their use of force in their community triggered a consent decree. Now, what a consent decree is when the Department of Justice or a higher level agency has to come in and basically tell your law enforcement agency that they are violating so many constitutional rights that instead of having a court make a decision for change, that they're going to have an agreement of the parties, that they're going to do this without being pushed into, but that they have no other choice. So what occurred from this case study in Albuquerque was that we saw they developed a civilian police oversight agency. Now, this is something that I take for granted because I grew up in the Bay Area where these types of reforms and these types of oversight agencies were fought for, and we've been living in that world for so long. There are plenty of states, there are plenty of major cities that do not have an independent agency looking at policy decisions for discipline or oversight. What they also achieved was some community policing councils, that going back to the civilian oversight, stressing that one more time and how important this is that you can help create this in your community. APD Forward Coalition and CASA status. Those are 2 things that I wish I could speak on. What I will tell you is not only is this being recorded, but the resources for Karen's presentation will be circulated and provided to everybody after the fact. Go ahead to the next slide. So, national effort. We mentioned, the national effort on elevating use of force. This is something that we don't really have time to do a deep dive on the bills, but go ahead on the next slide and I'll show you what we're looking at right now. So I mentioned the Peace Act. That was a follow-up at the federal level of California's AB 392, the use of force elevation. Now we see the Safe Policing for Safe Communities. That is the executive order by our president to address these issues. And then we have the Justice Act, which is a Senate Republican bill. And then we have the Justice and Policing Act. I highlighted Justice and Policing Act because LWVUS has already issued a letter of support for the Justice and Policing Act. I urge everyone to go ahead and review that text and legislation on your own time, and to urge your state leadership to go ahead and follow suit and follow up with a letter of support as well. Next slide, please. So we talked a lot about use of force. We talked a lot about the heavy ideas of asking these powerful questions and what League can do. Another thought when we are preparing to set the landscape for our next presenter are alternatives to incarceration. What does that actually mean? Well, it means looking to expand community-based services rather than law enforcement services, utilizing behavioral health responses so that our officers who are not trained behavioral health individuals aren't the first line of defense for somebody who's having a mental health crisis. And it also supports pretrial release and diversion services, and anybody who's gone to traffic school for their traffic ticket should understand what a diversion service is. It keeps you out of the court system. It keeps your record clear. These are the situations and the solutions to community needs and what community is calling for. It also provides for treatment instead of jail. So with that as a backdrop, I would like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Roxanne Kinnan-Smith, who's going to describe decriminalizing mental health and addiction. Thank you, Roxanne. Are you on?
Yes. At the 2019 League of Women Voters Montana Convention, delegates approved a review and study of the League's 2002 position on criminal justice. The overwhelming commonality in the interviews of the study was that the impact of addiction and mental illness was having a severe impact on our criminal justice system. And so the study team decided to limit the study to two particular areas: how to prevent or divert those whose primary cause of incarceration is addiction and mental illness from being incarcerated by providing appropriate treatment instead, and how to assist these individuals upon release to successfully build new lives and not end up incarcerated again. League of Women Voters of Montana believes that the state of Montana should incorporate mental health and substance abuse diversion processes to minimize incarceration of individuals with mental health and substance abuse disorders. Programs for mental health and substance abuse treatment and education, advice on vocational education, college opportunities, and job skills should be easily accessible before release, during pre-release processing, and in subsequent stages of reentry into society. The League recognizes the need for adequate funding and recommends the apportionment of money among the criminal justice system components to enable these recommendations and ensure that all are treated equally, regardless of age, gender, race, color, creed, or financial ability. A reduction in the number of people in prison through effective diversion and reintegration programs should permit reallocation of resources to help provide more effective substance abuse and mental health treatment services and equal procedural justice for all. The League supports tracking the outcomes of these services and interventions funded by the state of Montana. It's been indeed a pleasure to share the state of Montana's work.
Thank you, Roxanne. That was wonderful. And I just want to remind everybody who's participating that we will not only be circulating this recorded webinar, but that there will be additional materials. We do not expect everybody to digest this information. It's incredibly complex in just the few short moments that we have here today. So this is the elephant in the room, COVID-19 in prisons. When we started this presentation and preparing for this caucus, this was the bulk of our presentation. There have been so many things that have changed in the last month and a half that it's been pushed down to obviously a huge issue, and I wish we had more time. So what I do have is many resources for you to share. Go ahead to the next slide. What we know of COVID is that 5 of the largest COVID clusters are in state or federal facilities. And if you remember some of those earlier, what we learned that the vast majority of individuals are actually being held without charges pressed. So when you go into a state and federal facility, there are charges. We also are relying on the self-reporting, and that's kind of a dangerous situation when you're relying on a penitentiary or a state facility to count all the numbers in this day and age. What we do know is 548 individuals have died from COVID in a state or federal facility. We know that 46,249 are reported cases testing positive for COVID. These are numbers pulled just this last week, June 16th, from the Marshall Project. We know that Wyoming, Hawaii, and Idaho have not identified a single case. And it really begs the question, does that mean that it's just a pristine population that has never experienced COVID the way that the entire world is facing this challenge? Or are they just not testing, or are they just not reporting? We know that private prisons, which is not a bullet, are often asking individuals to sign waivers before they're given access to masks. This is an issue that I really urge all league members to look into and to ask those questions, because in custody is the only time that you are constitutionally protected and provided access to health care. That's something to consider. Now, as we move on to our urgent resolution addressing the long list of names that we didn't even have enough time to read off. It would have taken longer than an hour. It would have taken 24 hours to read every individual who's been murdered at the hands of the police. So I want to bring the attention of this convention members and our caucus attendees that the resolution committee has officially agreed to hear on the floor an urgent resolution of racial justice for Black people and people of color. I want to thank the drafting committee, Missouri, Arizona, California, Delaware, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Mexico, and New York, and the countless other league leaders who have supported this measure. And I urge every single one of you to vote yes on the floor. And now, before I transition away from my part, I just want you to consider one more thing, that we have to be okay with being vulnerable, and we have to be okay with being wrong, and we have to be okay with challenging things that we have learned, and to walk away from that past. This is the path to continue to move forward in this space where we honestly talk about race, where we have a reckoning with our own past and the part that we have played. And that's in an effort so that one day we can actually overcome racism in the future. So now it's time to transition to your time to speak. And so I'm really excited to hear from you. We're going to break you out in small groups. So thank you very much. And I encourage you to continue to confront racism, broaden your coalitions, and ask league questions. Thank you.
Hi, so this is Jenny Fay, and I just want to let you know that as we transition to small group discussions, that that well, because of the Zoom error, I actually had to fumble around a bit, and instead of like having 50 groups, we kind of now have like 20 groups. So you might, maybe if you were a note taker, you might be somewhere else, but hopefully for most of the people that were assigned, you're probably in your initial group. But if you're not in the group that you were assigned initially, then don't worry, you know, just go with the flow. So now I'm gonna open the all the breakout rooms. But yeah, okay.
I love your kitty, Jen.
Hold up. Here. Oh,
Hey.
cool.
How did this happen?
So Jen Wong, when you're ready.
Okay, so it looks like most people are back from the small group discussion. So now I'm actually going to present about Observer Corps. My name is Jennifer Wong, and I'm the co-lead of the San Francisco Observer Corps, along with Jenny J. Dub Wagner. So to get started, I just want to let you know that all of these resources will be available after this caucus. So first, I want to point you in the direction of the National League's resource guide, which is called Observing Your Government in Action, which describes both Observer Corps and what it means to be an observer in general. So what is an observer? Well, an observer is someone who attends a government meeting, whether that's virtually or in person. And optionally, they can take note of what happens, report back to the league, or report back to their community at large. And what's the value of an observer corps? Well, with the league, we're focused on openness, transparency, and accountability of government. So observer corps can help with that. Or as J-Dub likes to say, knowing someone is watching, even if they aren't actually watching, helps improve the government's performance. Additional value of an observer corps is really dependent on how you decide to set up your observer corps, where you're based. And I'll go into that a little bit later when I talk about some of the observer corps around the nation. So how does the Observer Corps benefit the community? And again, we stick with the openness, transparency, and accountability of government, but also we can create a civically engaged and empowered core of watchdogs in your community. You can connect individuals, including observers and observation recipients, with the government, and also connect elected and appointed officials with their constituents in the community. So what exactly is an observer corps? And to that I say, well, it's a vast range, and again, depends on how you decide to set it up. So in North and Central San Mateo County, they focus a lot on Spanish language access. So they ensure that this language access is available at government meetings within their county. And their focus is on monitoring those government meetings. In the league at Seattle, Washington, they focus on attending arraignment hearings to ensure that judges follow new bail protocols that have been issued. They also observe councils within the Seattle area, as well as some of the school boards in the area as well. And the League of Women Voters in Wake County, North Carolina, they've done something really great, which is they've put together a series of very interesting resources for their observers, including a resource called Power Pin, which tells you when you should be wearing your official observer pin, as I'm wearing right now. And what it's like observing the North Carolina legislature, including a list of committees and a General Assembly floor plan to make sure that you don't get lost as you're going to observe. We also have the national observers who observe the United Nations. So in 1945, we are officially recognized as an NGO, or non-governmental organization. And since then, we have had official observer status with the United Nations. So we focus a lot on human rights, including observing the Commission on the Status of Women. So how do Observer Corps fit in with criminal justice reform? And firstly, what I want to point out is that you can bring in experienced league members who are new to criminal justice reform, especially to bias and racism, into the Observer Corps and introducing them into criminal justice. You can also introduce new league members to these topics by giving them opportunities to learn about both the league and criminal justice reform in general. So we focus on the Observer Corps and doing no harm, which means that you're recognizing that people who have privilege may have different viewpoints than those who are most negatively impacted by the criminal justice system. So it's a reminder that what you care about may not be the views of those who are most negatively impacted. And it's important to notice the people who aren't in the room or maybe don't have the voice or the power to be within the room observing. So here you can see me. I'm actually observing a police commission meeting from February 2019, and I'm sitting there on my phone, but I'm actually tweeting about it, so sharing out that information. And at that time, I was very new to the Observer Corps and to what criminal justice reform meant. So some of the actions that we're taking in San Francisco is that we specifically focus on policing practices, which means that we observe police district meetings and also police commission meetings. We also train the public, so we involve the community. And the reason why we do that is we want to gain new members, but also we want to engage the community and ensure, again, that we're doing no harm and focusing on the work that's being done by community organizations. This often leads to advocacy, which is really great. Usually within 1 month of observing, observers who participate want to do more. And this also shines a light on the lack of transparency and oversight in policing in general. Another thing that we do is we lend the league's reputation and power. So for example, a labor expert asked that we focus on police contracts, so the contracts between the police union and also between the government. We also participate in the bias and use of force working groups, so that's headed up by Ashley Ravichet and also Maxine Anderson, who you heard from earlier. And we form partnerships with community organizations such as the Coalition on Homelessness, Wealth and Disparities in the Black Community, and Home ESF to ensure that these communities' voices are heard within policing. So if you want to hear more, definitely take a look at our survey, which asks more about what your Observer Corps is like. Join one of our upcoming observer trainings, which focuses on what we do in San Francisco to train observers. Join our Observer Corps in League Facebook group, or join the Observer Corps that observes the United Nations. So in other words, we want you to join, reignite, or start your Observer Corps in your league. And that's it, thanks.
I think we're going into Q&A now, right?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I have some good news. Karen Douglas made it to our Zoom. So Karen, if you could unmute yourself. Ashley did a great job of giving a quick overview without you here, but we would like you to say a few words. So can you please unmute yourself, Karen?
Yes, I just did. Thank you, Carolina, for introducing me. I apologize. I had some Zoom difficulty that I didn't have during the practice session, so I wasn't expecting this. Yes, I have participated as a league observer to Community Policing Council meetings and have also been a member of the APD Forward Coalition since 2015. The Albuquerque situation was that excessive use of force by the police department in the 2010 to 2014 timeframe, including 25 instances of deadly force, prompted a Department of Justice headquarters investigation and our consent decree, which stipulated 280 measures which required improvement by the police department. Our independent monitor for the consent decree, Dr. James Ginger, was selected in 2015 and has submitted 11 quarterly reports, most of which are followed by a public status hearing before the federal judge who supervises the independent monitor. Our current situation, we have a number of bodies who are active. The Civilian Police Oversight Agency actually reviews all excessive use of force cases and civilian complaints. They hold a monthly police oversight board meeting and vote on the level of discipline and recommend that to the chief of police. The Civilian Police Oversight Agency is appointed by the City Council, and they really hold a lot of authority, and they are separate, and the City Council is separate from the mayor's office. The community policing councils, we have 6, one associated with each of our 6 police area commands, and they permit the residents to interact with the police officers who service their area. Our current CASA status is we're on track for primary compliance, which means that the policy is approved and in place. We're at 100%. Secondary compliance, meaning officers are trained to that policy, we're at 93%. Operational compliance is lower at 73%. Challenges that remain is the first level supervisors, the sergeants, actually applying the level of discipline within the required time frame. And we're working with that challenge right now. The mayor just organized a new community safety department, which will deal with mental health and substance abuse cases, rather than referring them to armed officers.
Thanks so much, Karen. I'm so sorry that we had those technical difficulties, but we're glad you were able to share a bit. As you can tell, we're going to have a lot more questions than we can address here, but we are going to do our best to get to a few of them. One of them had to do with tools. What tools do we have to help leagues launch a criminal justice reform committee if they don't already have one? Well, we have a criminal justice webpage that has many resources and ideas, so please check that out. But I'm also reading it as, how do you actually get started? I would, and we did, talk with our league leadership first. We wanted to know, what it is from their perspective we could do. We reached out to our membership and had a meeting with them to ask them what they thought the direction was best for us to go. There are so many areas of reform, and of course we needed to prioritize. The Criminal Justice Committee in Los Angeles started interviewing law enforcement leaders as well as community leaders, and that was really how we got our start. The next question that I'd like to get to is for you, Ashley. It has to do with use of force. Someone wanted to know the difference between necessary and reasonable. Could you take a minute to talk about that?
I will do my best. That's a great question. And in fact, it's a legal question. It's a question for the courts. What we have seen is that the courts have decided that officers engaged in the line of their job and in on duty or even off duty need to use the amount of force that is reasonable to effect the arrest. Now, that seems fair enough. That's what the courts have decided. But what that is a very loaded question, because what you see in most of these situations is that an individual is not actually at the point of arrest. It's not a de facto arrest when an individual is getting harmed. And so our elevation of that standard of moving beyond the language of what's reasonable to stating in the state of California that you can only use deadly force, and that's specific, it's deadly force when it is necessary, when that is your only option. It's requiring you to think before you act, to think before you shoot, and to make sure that you engage in alternatives before you pull out your gun and make the final decision to shoot. I hope that answers the question. It's a very difficult legal sensed one, but it is important and it is nuanced, and it's something that we are seeing slowly change and that communities and states and even law enforcement agencies such as San Francisco, internally, the policy, they elevated the use of force to only when necessary. Granted, they had the Department of Justice looking over their shoulders, part of that kind of consent decree where it's not really an option, but they did it on their own, which is remarkable. And I encourage and implore all law enforcement agencies to say, hey, this isn't keeping our officers safer to allow them to just live like it's the wild, wild west, shooting your gun off whenever. We expect a little bit more. So hopefully.
Actually, I have a feeling that this question will have to be decided in court, and we haven't yet seen our new law tested in court, but that's when it's going to get truly defined. The next question has to do with COVID and budget cuts, and the concern about defunding police. It's a big conversation all over the United States right now. And if you haven't done a lot of research in this area, I want to say it does not mean eliminate the police. Defunding police really refers to reducing the budget so that communities can have the money they need to provide services in mental health, drug addiction support, and homelessness. My committee had a meeting with our police chief last year who actually said, use these words, and he will say it again, it is a shame that the public relies on law enforcement to respond to things that we need social services for. Now, whether or not he's ready to reduce his budget is another question. But he admits that police should not be doing these things. Okay, the next question. Again, Ashley, this one's for you. Oh,
Okay.
no, sorry. Maxine, this is a good question about reentry. Somebody wants to know, when is the best time to work with people who are leaving prison? How do we help them understand voting and the importance of voting at the local level as opposed to voting for president? Maxine?
Okay. Yes, I got it. Okay, and I'm back. Okay, thanks for the question. This is a good reminder for all of us to connect with reentry services in our area and be sure they have voter registration materials and voter guides and contact information if they have any questions. If we develop those relationships early, then I think what will happen is that as people reenter the society, so to speak, then they'll be funneled directly to the league. And perhaps that's one of the things we could do. We can make a concerted effort to partner with reentry organizations to offer nonpartisan presentations on pro-cons prior to elections. So maybe if the people who are reentering are interacting with those organizations, then they would know, okay, we're going to have a pro-con, the league is going to do it, and please show up and learn.
Thank you, Maxine.
I hope that answered the question.
Oh, this is our last question as we're running out of time. It has to do with something Chris Carson sent to all of us recently. I'm just going to say it very quickly. She had about a couple of paragraphs about this, but basically it's the league needs to stay in their lane. And the question from the audience was, what does that mean? And so Jen Say, would you take a hand at this, answering this question? What does it mean for the league to stay in their lane?
Well, I think what Chris Carson, said was, our league president was that, there are many organizations like representing, people and like communities who have long, pursued racial justice and police reforms, and that it's not, for us, as a 100-year organization, our lane has been mostly voting rights. And that, and that we shouldn't like take, I think, especially now that we're gonna jump into space, to not necessarily take resources away from those organizations, that is leading the racial justice movement in this country. And I think, as especially, really second what Maxine just said about, partnering with reentry services. I think just in general, as as we're going to start to do with our resolution, to start, if it gets passed, to start to do the work of rooting out racism in the justice system, we really need to center our work around folks and communities impacted by racism in the justice system. We need to work with orgs that have been doing the work of rooting out racism in the justice system, to learn from them and to support them the best we can without appropriation, because we're not experts. And we're just learning, and we should not be the ones defining what safety is or what public safety is. It is the folks and communities impacted by the justice system that should define what safety is, and we can't do this work alone, and we need to be mindful of our lane as a mostly voting rights org, and also of our blind spots about why it took us so long to get here. And just like as we tread forward to do this kind of work on all levels of government, we need to support and center orgs that have been doing the work. And most importantly, if we are truly committed to this work, we need to be centering our work around folks and communities impacted by the justice system. Sorry, I just really want to stress that point. Yeah, that's kind of my answer to Chris Carson's staying in lane
Thanks.
question.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Maxine, take us to next steps. Next slide, please. Yes.
Okay, I'm talking, but I'm talking just to myself because I hadn't unmuted. Okay, so what's next? Activate an observer corps. Connect with your state league and other local leagues. Connect with people listed in the Caucus participant directory, which you will be receiving by email soon. Make sure your state league votes for the urgent resolution, and keep an eye out for the next webinar on a specific aspect of justice reform. Thank you for being with us. You can stay in touch with us by email if you wish at criminaljustice@lwvc.org. And thank you. This has been great. I've learned even more about criminal justice, and your questions were wonderful.
Yes, you'll be hearing from us in the future. We're putting together some follow-up materials for you.